Hey everyone, welcome and thanks for tuning into LCC Remix Roundtable Edition. This is a discussion where our pastors unpack the current message in a deeper way. We hope this episode encourages and speaks to you.
Well, thank you for joining us for yet another episode of LCC Remix. We are excited that you're listening, all 8 of you, according to the latest statistics. Just kidding. I don't really check.
Your mom said she's still listening, and I talked to her Sunday.
Oh, you really? She is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure. So
She was one of those 8.
yeah, Mom listened to it 8 times. That's good to know. So, no, but
Moms are 4.
yeah, we're glad you're here. We're glad you're taking time to go a little bit deeper in the Word of God, and we hope what is shared today will be a blessing to you as we continue looking at our current series, Jonah, going kind of verse by verse through the great Old Testament book of Jonah. I think it's a timely book. And before we get into this week's stuff, I mean, your impressions so far of the series or of the book of Jonah itself, like, I mean, I said it feels like a timely series, and I really do believe that. So I guess from like a loving your enemies kind of standpoint, it seems like we have a little bit of heightened anger and angst in the country today.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, or we're just going to...
Was it? Go ahead. Aaron's full of thoughts.
Just looking at Greg to say, okay, lead us off. No, I think it has been very timely. It's funny how, I shouldn't say it's funny. It's interesting how it seems like that happens all the time. Like you get the right word at the right time, for you individually, it happens that way, but also, corporately it happens that way as well. And so, just coming down to, and this week, talking about, who do you look for control? Like who's in control?
Mm-hmm.
And we can spend a lot of time thinking that we're in control.
We're not?
And then crying because we're not.
When that discovery is made, yeah.
Yes.
I like it. It kind of brings to the, I think sometimes we feel or we experience emotions or whatever and never put them into words, so we don't understand them. And with this book, it really brings to light that whole idea of, when God calls you to do something, it goes beyond who you are. It takes you out of your comfort zone. And even if it calls you to an uncomfortable, love, like we're talking about loving your enemies or whatever, that's not an option for a believer.
Nope.
And somehow to honor God in all those things, and just, we're so used to, it's me, do what I want, how I feel, or I don't like this, or I don't, whatever. And this book kind of brings, to light that it's not about you. It's about His will and what He wants done. And so we got to, we serve Him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of, sometimes we have these feelings where I don't want to do, whatever. And this kind of brings that to light. It's not about my particular, how I feel about something or what I want to do. It's about serving Him. And regardless if that makes me uncomfortable. And if it does make me uncomfortable, maybe that's a time to do some self-examination as to why that would make me uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just, leaving that out there as far as, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not going to do it. Well, no, maybe it's time to examine why I'm uncomfortable and why I can't trust Him, all those things. So I think this is one of those books that really brings that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That trust issue that you talked about there is just hugely important because, faith and trust in God that He does have I want to say this correctly because it isn't about us. So I was going to say He has our best, interests in mind. That is true. I mean, He knows what's best for us. It's not about like, I want to fulfill all my wish. God doesn't exist to fulfill our wishes and desires, but His ways are better. And once we lay hold of that and trust Him that no matter what He asks to do, where He wants to send us, what his word teaches us to do when we surrender. We talk about surrender a lot. When we let go, when we fully trust him, then, all of those other issues that were, we gain everything because we gain Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point, bringing us to the end of ourselves. I think you say that quite a bit. We have to come to the end of ourselves. And that is so counter to everything that we experience as human beings, because we do make everything about us. We do try to exercise control, as you said. We make everything.
Well, Jesus told the parable, except a grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides alone.
Right.
And he has called us, we're to be crucified with Christ. Mm-hmm. It's not I that live, but Christ lives in me. Yeah. And and it's interesting because the next verse says, "And the life I now live." Yeah. So it seems like it's contradicting, but no, that's the truth.
Live by faith in the Son of God, right? So it always comes back to that.
Yeah, faith and trust.
Faith and trust.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Well, great. That was a great discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, one of the big stories of this book is just that, your opinion is not truth, right? God's plan is going to happen regardless. He's going to give us opportunities to, be obedient, to go where he calls us to go. But no matter how much we want to rail against it because we don't like it, everything's still going to happen. It's going to happen according to, again, his plan, his will, his timing. And, he wants us to be part of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So specifically to what we were talking about this week, we talked about the storms, the storm that was sent to Jonah, and, Jonah having to face the consequence of his own disobedience. And I mentioned 3 types of storms: the storms that we create in our own world. We sometimes just reap what we sow. There's storms that the enemy sends our way, but there's also those storms that, and this was the very unsettling thing I think for a lot of believers to know. There's the storms that God sends to offer course correction, and I don't know, when you think about that. I mean, what do you think? Let's maybe talk about that for a minute. When to know that God will maybe orchestrate or bring about circumstances that are painful just to get our attention. That goes even beyond our own, it's a result of the choices that we're making, but he's the one that sends that storm. What do we think about that? Because isn't God just supposed to love us and
I think, so the way I think about things sometimes it's too big to think about. So you have to bring it down, to something that's, that's in our grasp. And so being a father or a parent, we do that to our children all the time.
If we're a good parent.
If you're a good parent, yeah. So you it's out of love, you offer those course corrections. Sometimes it's through discipline. Sometimes it's, there's a bunch of different ways that happens, but sometimes more severe the disobedience, usually the more severe the course correction. I like your word there, your choice of words. More severe the course correction is. And so we do that all the time as parents, and then we know that's what we're supposed to do. That's the right thing to do. And we have a heavenly Father. Let those words sink in. He's a heavenly Father. And so he does that. We think we're adults. We're whatever. No. We're still his children. You're a believer. You're his child. And so he does that, but he can't put us in timeout. Well, he can. Usually it involves a hospital bed or something. It's a little more drastic. It's not like a spanking. But he does that to us. It's the same thing, just on a different scale. And a child. If a child wants, and they can understand why they can't have what they want, but you as an adult, as a parent, know why they can't have what they want, and so you do discipline or whatever. It's the same, we're the same way. We're hard-headed most of the time.
Yeah.
And we want, or we think it should be this way. And our Heavenly Father has stepped in and go, no, it needs to be this way. And this is what I want you to do. And you don't have to understand it right now, but you have to be obedient. And, it's the same way with our children. When you're raising kids, little Johnny at 3 years old isn't going to understand what I'm trying to tell him right now. He just needs to listen to me. Yeah. And so I put it, because it's, when you're talking about those things with God, it's too big for me to wrap my mind around, but I can wrap my mind around, because I'm a parent, and so I've done those exact same things on a different scale.
Sure.
And so that, and we're, like I said, we're his children. And sometimes he needs to use a bigger storm to get our attention.
The correction and discipline part is easier to swallow than some of the. You talk about being a parent and your kids. When you think about loss, that's where it gets harder, I think, because like you said, isn't God supposed to love us, and some situations that we can be put in. And I think about David, with the baby that he prayed for and fasted and was doing all this and still lost the baby and
lost his son.
And throughout all of it, doing all that he felt he could do, and he was, and still experience the loss. There are things that we go through that make it harder to say, how are you a loving God? And everything, if you're following, I truly believe that everything is going to work out. And again, to look at that example with David, how when the baby passed, he got up and was like, we're going to be reunited again. I know where he went, which is great. And that's kind of the way that you kind of have to look at it. But again, certain situations, it's hard. It's a lot easier for me to accept hard stuff that is like correcting me, that is just me. But when you talk about some situations, it's not, it's like,
some things that just don't make sense.
That don't make sense. And you just, all you can do is just trust that it was for his purpose.
Yeah, and that's the bedrock of faith that we have to always come back to, and that's the challenge. It's easy for us to say, it's easy for me to say now, but when you're facing situations like that, that's a real challenge to know, like, okay, this doesn't make sense and this hurts, and I'm trying to see what you're trying to teach me through this. And sometimes we don't get the answers to some of those things, but we have to fall on trust. At the end of the day, I'm going to trust you. When you were talking about, disciplining children earlier, I'm reminded with my own boys who always would, my younger one more than the older one, but would question. Like when you'd say, we need to do this. Well, why? Okay. Now, part of that's the personality that God's given them and a curiosity. And I sometimes it was just being rebellious, not want to do it. But sometimes, honestly, I think there was just a genuine, like, I just want to know why. Like, I have a curiosity about it. And I remember at one point fussing at both of them. And, we were out in public somewhere, and I said, get over here now or something. They were young, because I could perceive a potential danger that they couldn't see. And they wanted to keep playing and doing. I'm like, get over here now. And then I finally had to kind of lay into them because they weren't listening. And I said, sometimes you just need to understand that if I say something, you don't need the reason. I see something that you don't, and you need to just obey. And that's kind of a lesson for, that we need to hear from the Lord. He sees things that we don't. It doesn't make sense, but we just need to trust him and obey. Right.
Well, one of the things that brings out is the depth of our relationship with the Lord that's one of a marker of that is the amount of trust and the amount of the ability to see God doing something in the middle of a storm. Like a father-son or father-daughter relationship there's a depth there that even if there's a rebellious point, but there's a depth there that I trust that if my dad is saying something, if my mom is saying something, I need to listen. My flesh tells me I need to not listen, but that depth of relationship there may be people listening who's like, I don't feel God in these situations. I don't see God working in these situations, and I'm trying to see it, but I don't see it. And I think it's one of those, do we talk about examining ourselves? Like, where is my relationship with God? Like how, it's funny because we're working through some mission stuff right now here at church, and putting the words, supporting or partnering with are two different things. And sometimes we feel like, I'm supporting God, meaning I'm going to church, I'm giving my 10%, I'm putting some time in, maybe even doing a little, devotional time during the week. But what I'm doing is I'm supporting God, and there's not that deeper level of partnership with Him. Like, I'm not giving back. I'm just taking, and I need to give back in that relationship. And so I just feel like one of the markers of our relationship with God is when we're in the middle of something like a storm. Is it Him that we run to?
Right.
Because you pointed out this week, that we can run to a lot of things. And I love how you put that, like whatever our God is, we can run to.
Run from.
Or run from. Yes.
Which is in the story. But again, in those kind of situations, are you running to Him or from Him?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Talking about, the trust issue again, you think of Abraham, the father of faith. And the story we know in Hebrews talks about, like, he had reason. Like, I mean, it's bad enough to lose a child. I haven't experienced that, but I mean, I understand. But for God to say, you're going to sacrifice your son, and Hebrews says that he had reason that God was able to raise him from the dead, and I'm just going to do what He said. And to me, that is such a faith that, I mean, I don't have that faith. I don't have that faith. But man, to have that kind of faith, I think that's such a model for us to kind of shoot towards.
We talk about the storms and stuff, and Scott, you brought a good point. Those things that we don't understand why, and that God, I think God speaks to us in His silence. But that speaking in that silence is, because we want to understand, like you were talking, Aaron, I want those questions. I want, and I think God allows us to, or initiates to go through those things that are so far out of our understanding, and we're looking for answers. And it seems like, heaven has shut down, there's just silence. But I think once again that God in that moment even is teaching, just trust. Don't try and understand. Don't try and just trust. And I think I mentioned it before, but years ago I was working. It says that to wait on the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall rise up as well. And I think, what does it mean to wait on the Lord? What does it mean to wait on the Lord? And finally, it came to me. Don't come to any conclusions. Is you leave it open ended, and then those. I forget who it was, but someone wrote a book called The Dark Night of the Soul. Where you go through those things, and there seems when you're in a storm, you can't see anything because the storm's raging around you. You can't see past the storm. You don't know why. You don't know whatever, but just somehow. Simply, even in the midst of that, and in the pain or the unknowing or whatever, simply resting in, if that's a good word, your trust, and that God is in control. And if that's I think trust isn't trust till that's all you've got to hold on to. If you've got something else you can grab onto, an understanding or whatever, you're not really trusting,
Yeah.
But I think God, and part of our growth and is to trust Him, and even in those things, because we're all going to, if you haven't faced it yet, you're going to it sometime. There are going to be things that happen in life you just do not understand.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be tragedy you don't understand. There's going to be circumstances that don't make any sense, or I didn't ask for that, or I was, whatever. But if you're a believer and you've given your life to the Lord, He's in control. And so regardless of what's going on, just simply to trust. And that, yes, is that easier said than done? Yeah. But that's kind of what point we have to get to. And it's when you get to the point where you have nothing else, you get to the point you really have nothing else, except just trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pleases God.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Without
Absolutely.
faith, it's impossible to please Him.
God. That's good. I'm hearing all this scripture. It's really good. I think too, and I mentioned it on Sunday. Trust in our lives. In the story we see Jonah asleep in the ship, and he's not asleep because he's trusting God or at peace with God. I think it's more like I just want to be unconscious. I'm in a stupor. It's a form of escapism, and we can be guilty of that when God sends storms, and we can bury our heads in the sand and say, no. We either run to our God or whatever, or we go to sleep. We're not awake. We don't pay attention. But how Jesus in the New Testament, who was asleep in the boat, could do that because he fully trusted God. He's God the Son, fully God, fully man. But he is trusting his Father, so that the storm that is there, that the enemy sends to try to do what the enemy does, which is kill, steal, or destroy, he has no fear. Even though his disciples are scared out of their minds, he's like, no, I'm in control here. And it's a good lesson for us to remember. Like, when we land on that place of trust, we will have the peace that passes all understanding. We won't have all the answers, but we will have peace, I believe.
Yep.
So, anyway. All right. So one of the other things I brought up on Sunday was the difference in the heart.
Awkward pause.
Yeah, awkward pause. I thought Chuck Smith was here for a second. Long.
I was having flashbacks.
Did my CD or tape player break? Going back a few years.
No, we're still here.
He was teaching it, just pause. And it's not even for effect. It's not like he paused. It's like
he's thinking.
He's thinking. But the difference in attitude between those sailors on the ship, those mariners who showed compassion even after they cast lots, even after they discover, and Jonah confesses, hey, you are in the predicament you are in because of me, 100% because of me. And really, the only way you're going to get out of this is you got to throw me over the side. And how those pagan men showed compassion. Again, they were completely, the harm that Jonah potentially was bringing to them, they could have been justified in anger and retaliation, and doing what they wanted to do, and they didn't. And it's such a contrast, their heart and attitude versus Jonah's heart and attitude when it came to the people of Nineveh. Like he wasn't willing to show mercy or compassion. It was interesting.
That's amazing to me. I mean, that blows me away, because if we cast lots and then you confess, I'm throwing your overboard.
It'd have been like a scene from This Is Sparta, like kick the dude down the well. Like, this is happening now.
The words wouldn't have gotten very far out of your mouth before you were headed over the side. And they had already lost their cargo, so they've lost all their money.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, it's already cost them dearly.
And lose their ship,
their lives are potentially on the line.
Yeah.
You're going overboard.
Yeah.
And it's just, and that's one of those things. How in the world these guys really had integrity?
They did.
And I never thought about the contrast between them and Jonah, though.
Mm-hmm.
Here Jonah, all he has to do is walk in the city and say something,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a whole big deal.
And it's even a message that you think he'd like.
Yeah,
because he didn't like him anyway.
God's going to kill you all. Have a nice day.
The city will be. You are all going to be destroyed.
Yeah. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Yeah.
But it's pretty amazing.
It's wild. And even when they decide to go through with it, the fact that they pray to the Lord.
Oh yeah.
Do not hold this man's blood against us. We don't want to shed innocent blood. I mean, they still looked at him, innocent. To me,
they all found a synagogue when they got back on land.
I'll tell you probably. What. They made that. I mean, to me, I didn't really linger on this one verse because it was towards the end of the message, but that they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and they made vows.
Took vows, yeah.
They took vows, and if those men had the integrity that we believe in from the context, they fulfilled those vows.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, like you said, find us. I don't doubt.
Yeah.
We need to find us some Hebrews.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about
God rocks.
experiencing
Cool.
God. They
Yeah.
experienced God right in that
First
moment.
they prayed
Yes.
to their gods.
Yes.
And 9 verses
Yes.
later, they're
Yeah, it's revival on a
Right.
ship. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're getting saved.
Well, just imagine how, life changing experience. What that would be when this does happen. You throw the guy, and immediately it's calm.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen when the storm's over.
Mhm.
It doesn't calm that that quickly. But imagine he hits the water, they see him disappear, and then goes flat. And everybody's like, "Oh my!"
Well, and they had the same reaction that the disciples did.
They
right?
did.
Yeah.
Couldn't
Yeah.
believe
Like
it.
complete fear of like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah, yeah.
That's not
Okay,
supposed to happen.
okay, Jewish God, you win.
Right. And again, going back to the story with Jesus, but prophecy is pattern. We hear that said. Missler said that, but I mean, in the old, here's the example, right? Only God could do that, and yet Christ, who being God, I mean, people who will make the same lame argument, like, oh, he never claimed to be God. No, he did multiple times,
all
and
the
he
time.
also did things only God could do. He had control over nature. He forgave sins. I mean, everything that he did pointed that I am God. So
Yeah.
so you gotta kind of land on that issue. You can't just say it's the liar, lunatic, and Lord, right? You can't.
Yeah.
He either lied about everything or he was crazy. And we can prove both of those things are completely false. So he has to be Lord. He is he's Lord. So the chapter kind of ended with the appointed fish. And I love that word appointed, man.
That is cool.
Like your whole purpose in life is to swallow Jonah. I mean, that's your moment, And if God ordains that for a fish, what does He ordain for us that are to inherit salvation? Like what has He appointed you to do, us to do?
Yeah.
And it's not devour one another. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's not good.
But I just thought that was just an interesting point.
Yeah.
But
Fish is out there minding his own business, looking for some food.
doing what a fish
But
does,
they always do. In fish world, you're either looking to eat something
or something's looking
or trying not to be
not
eaten.
to be eaten. Yeah, something's looking for you.
But I guess you're that size. That fear's kind of left you at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty wild.
No. And again, we mentioned this. I know, Greg, you mentioned it. I mentioned it this week. Like, this isn't an allegory. This isn't. I mean, I don't believe it's an allegory. It's not. These aren't metaphors. This isn't a fable. This is an actual event. And I honestly don't understand why people have a hard time swallowing this story. I just don't.
No,
I wish they would quit their carping.
Oh, that's good. Everybody likes to find their thing to perch on.
Oh, man.
Anyone?
I got it.
Anyone?
I caught you a delicious bass.
Thank you, Napoleon. Napoleon. We're eating grandma's steak.
We watched that the other
Eat
night.
the food, Tina.
You
I
watched
felt
it?
dumber after it was over.
Apparently he, what's his name?
John Heder.
Yeah, apparently he was at an event recently. He's older, but he has longer hair, but he still had a fanny pack on for some reason. But he got up on stage with this group of young people, and they did. The people knew the whole sign language bit, so they played it, and he did it. And he closed his eyes, and it was like because Napoleon does the same thing, but he had his eyes closed. And he was doing all the movements from this has been 20 years now, probably the movie.
Yeah.
Wow.
And people were just cracking up because he remembered. It was to the song. Was it "Some Say Love"? Is it Linda Ronstadt?
Yes.
It's not the Rose. What's it called?
It's the Rose.
The Rose.
It's called
the
the
Rose.
Rose. Yes.
Yeah. Linda Ronstadt's haunting ballad. But my favorite part is when he makes the little doves with his hands. This really digressed, but
It's one of the classic youth group films of all time.
fell asleep the first time it was on, couldn't even finish it, and then watched it the second time. And then it's one of those things that just the youth kind of latched onto, and It's a funny movie.
It is a funny movie. I like tots.
Give me some of your tots. Bring me the lip balm. My lips hurt real bad. It's all these one-liners.
It is one-liner
Pedro for
paradise.
president,
man.
What kind of skills do you have? Bow staff skills, nunchuck skills. or my favorite. It took me like 3 hours just to do the shading on the lip. Drawing you made.
The liger.
The liger. He drew that picture of that girl. Oh my goodness.
Wow, we've just delved into Napoleon world.
Yeah.
Oh my. Anyway, yeah, the fact that Jesus. Let's go back.
Yeah. Let's get back to what really matters.
But yeah, people do struggle with this, and I talked about you talked about it too. It's somewhere between a nursery rhyme and a fable for people. And it's a nice story, but I don't know what Jesus said. Just as, which means just as. Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth, So, he's saying it's a real story.
Yeah.
And I know God can do pretty much anything he wants to do.
Absolutely.
And, so there's no question. If Jesus, it happened, it's a real thing. And it just, we marvel that God would do something like that. But, how else was he going to get Jonah where he needed to be at the appointed time?
I mean, they could have used a fish. He could. Because the thing that I don't understand when people have objections, they obviously have objections to anything they perceive as supernatural or miraculous. But even if you are a naturalist in your philosophy and your naturalism is the way, the fact that we exist, creation itself is the greatest miracle. If you can believe everything came from nothing, as one comedian said, that's a magical nothing.
Yeah.
It's a pretty incredible, miraculous nothing. So if you can believe that, then why are these, in many respects, lesser things hard for you to believe? I don't understand it.
That's a good point, because I'm talking about like believers who, maybe that's again allegorical or whatever, and they'll from the flood to parting of the sea, like these things that are questioned, but they have no issue with creation. Like, wait a minute, so you're telling me that you're okay with the fact that he spoke the universe into being, but he couldn't. Yeah, like flood the earth,
or exactly,
the fish.
Right.
What?
Raise the dead, or that can't happen.
We become so accustomed to things, but if it's the idea of a husband and wife come together, and a child is born. Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about all the things that have to happen.
Yeah.
All this, you're talking about a miracle.
I tried to say it on Sunday.
Yeah.
Like, look in the mirror. Like, if you don't believe miracles, you are
just
how many countless miracles to get you here right now?
Oh yeah, right. just the miracle of childbirth.
Yeah. Right.
And then you watch that baby, which I always talk about. Babies are the coolest humans, but watch that child grow and develop and learn and just watch. And when they're born, just perfect fingers and toes and all just beautiful and but we're so used to seeing that we've kind of written that off as a miracle. But you and I raise chickens and stuff and hatching out birds or whatever, and I'm amazed all the time.
On the 21st day, how it happens.
It's literally
like day 21. Here comes the chick.
I also raised rabbits too, and just had a litter a little while ago, and just it's so cool just to watch all this, but all those things are miracles.
They are.
But we're so used to them that we've kind of written them off. That just happens all the time.
That's true.
How is that any less? I guarantee it's a whole lot easier for a big fish to swallow something. It's a whole lot easier for that to happen than it is for an egg or a chick to pop out of this egg after 3 weeks. But we see one all the time. We don't see the other one very often. Or ever.
Any of these things are more possible, probable, however you want to say it, then life from non-life. The law of biogenesis. Life can't come from
right. There has to be information.
So
there
any
has
of
to
those
be
things are easier than that. Right?
Oh yeah, sure.
And so if you know if you're teetering or questioning or you think that things went a certain way, understand that what you're saying you believe is there was life from unlife, and it wasn't like a global event. It was like one cell ever.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people who say they believe these things don't actually know what they're saying.
Well, they never thought it through.
No, it just takes more faith.
One time, one cell became alive just out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that turned into what we see today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
what's more likely?
I mean,
Yeah.
people come from, people like to say Christians, well, you have a biased worldview. You believe your supernatural book written by men, like you claim it's supernatural, but it's written by men. You believe, you have the God of the gaps, because you're not scientific, you can't, you have to use God as your reason for that. And that's not it at all.
That's not true.
What you're saying.
If you don't believe in God, any God really, but if you don't believe in God, then your God is time, because you believe that given enough time, something will happen that will get us to where we are now. So, just like I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, and whatever your worldview may be, you live on faith.
And time is actually the enemy, because things actually spiral out of control.
True, but you have to. I mean, you have to have an enormous amount of it first
better,
in order to, what's the adage? A million monkeys on a million typewriters in a million years would produce the works of Shakespeare. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually just saw an article about that the other day. They said, no, that's not possible.
Agreed. Agreed.
But I always
unless God appointed the monkeys.
There you go. I always picture that. They talk about that, the lightning striking the ooze, and that first cell is generated, whatever, and that thing. I always picture it crawls out of the ooze and crawls up on the rock and dies.
Right, because it was such a great environment for life.
It can't eat. It can't do anything.
Now life exists, but what's it going to do? Nope.
Well, even using some of the arguments that naturalists make, the Cambrian explosion alone. I was speaking with a young man that was an atheist back during the fair, and he had never heard of the Cambrian explosion. And I said, I'm not even arguing from a Christian worldview. Explain to me how all of these different creatures appeared in the same period of time, advances like leaps and bounds. According to evolutionists, like they don't understand why it all happened at once. Like where'd all this life come from all at once? I said, and he was like, "What's it called?" And I told him, "Cambrian explosion. Look into it." And because it doesn't make sense.
No,
right.
But anyway, miracles. I think if you're a believer, you see miracles everywhere.
Yeah, you
should see miracles everywhere. I really believe that.
Another miracle we overlook sometimes is the miracle of new life. Not just life itself, but someone who coming to the Lord and repenting, and God making them a new person, and you see the change. You experience that. And the person who was given their life to Christ, everything changes. Your what you see, what you hear, all that stuff changes, and that's a miracle. It's a miracle of the new birth, not just the physical birth.
No, you're right. You're right about that. No, there's so many miracles, and I think Romans 1 even talks about the fact that we're just without excuse when it comes to really looking at the general revelation of the Lord in all those ways. Yes. And then, of course, talking about what you're talking about spiritually, that new birth and new life is just, a life transformed by Jesus is the greatest testimony, I think, to the power of God.
Yeah.
And there's purpose in all of it too. I feel like the older I get, the more like I've really been paying attention to the seasons this year. I mean, I always have loved the changing of seasons, but I look at them because our lives are constantly changing and we're moving into new seasons. And, we even see the correlation of our own human development and growth and aging and deterioration over time in the promise of a new life and a new birth. But we see even within the seasons, the handiwork of the Lord. And just this time of year, it's just, you're just so aware of like, even though things are changing and appear to be dying and deteriorating, there still is that promise of life on the other end of that. And I don't know, to me, it's just, there's lessons every day. Like you can't escape it.
Yeah.
You have to be like Jonah. You have to go to sleep. you have to try to stay asleep.
Yeah. Or entertain yourself into oblivion.
Yeah, that's true.
I'll tell you another miracle. So we just had our first rain in 38 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle of November. I picked a cucumber and a squash out of my garden last week. I have not watered my garden.
No.
I've got tomato plants
I don't know
that
how.
are growing up now. They're
Yeah.
about this tall. I'm not going to get any tomatoes, but they were from, I guess, some rotten ones that fell earlier in the season, and they're about 1.5 foot tall.
Yeah.
I was holding up my hands. You couldn't see what I was saying, but they're about 1.5 foot tall.
I have these thing called spoon tomatoes, which they're tiny. They're like miniature cherry tomatoes. I don't know why anybody would do that, but they bloomed again.
Thank you, NASA.
They've actually bloomed again.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which is crazy, But anyway,
I haven't had much experience. This is a gardening moment, but have you been able to transplant tomato plants that have grown and really get them like indoors for the winter? Have you ever tried that?
oh no, I hate tomatoes, so I don't.
that's true.
I don't even bother with that.
Why do you grow them?
Explore
My
that.
wife loves
Oh,
tomatoes.
there you go. Okay. I was like, all right, that makes sense. I love tomatoes. I think homegrown tomatoes are some of the greatest things on the planet.
I want to like tomatoes.
For real.
I try. Every year or two, I try.
It's interesting though, because you like salsa.
Yeah, but I can't stand the smell of a tomato plant. I can't. The taste of a tomato, I don't know what it is. I want to like tomatoes.
That's like me with cantaloupe for all these years. Just I want to encourage you. That's encouragement for you, brother. Like keep trying them.
I try.
Because one day you'll like them. Because it happened with me with cantaloupe a couple years ago. And I tried for like almost 40 years. Like the smell was fine, but I would bite it and I'd gag. I'd literally gag. Like I hate this.
Cantaloupe.
But now I eat cantaloupe.
One of the most
I'm like,
blessed
this is good.
foods.
Yeah. So keep working.
I'll press on
There's hope for you.
There's
There's hope for you.
to like tomatoes. The little spoon tomatoes are actually pretty good.
I saw the picture you sent.
Yeah,
They were all in a little spoon.
like 6 of them on a spoon.
Wow.
That's pretty cool.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Well, if you've enjoyed talking about miracles,
This was our useless gardening section.
Jonah, gardening,
Green thumb
Napoleon Dynamite. We've kind of run the spectrum here this morning.
Never know what you get.
You never know.
It's kind of an ode to Mark. Mark was always good for that. Random topic.
Yes.
Throw a little Monty
Yeah,
Python.
we'll have to
in
get
there.
Mark to come in and do a guest appearance here before too long.
He would always say that illustration, and we'd all be looking at him like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Oh, Mark. If you're listening, Mark, hi.
Hey,
Anyway, any other thoughts before we let these fine people go? Let my people go.
Aaron's up this week.
I am.
Yeah.
We get the prayer this week.
Aaron's talking about being in that great fish.
To this point, Jonah's just continued to go down, down, down.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to look up this week. So
That's right. Cool. That's where we all need to be.
yeah.
Get to that point where we start looking up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're looking forward to it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, God bless you. Hopefully there was something redeeming or of benefit in this to you, that you feel a little bit closer to the Lord. If not, we are very sorry for that. We don't want to be a hindrance to that. We want to be a help. But God bless you, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to LCC Remix. If you have any questions about this podcast, reach out via email at lccremix@lifechurchcalvert.com. LCC Remix is a podcast ministry of Life Church Calvert, located in Huntingtown, Maryland. You can visit our website, lifechurchcalvert.com, or download our app by typing in Life Church Calvert in your app store today.